Welcome to Dialogue, a true crime conversation. I'm your host, Rebecca Sebastian, and this is the weekly interview format true crime podcast. So I don't know about you, but something weird has been happening for me, and it's that I haven't been wanting to watch true crime content lately. I know, it's weird. It's unexpected. It's a little problematic for the job. I've just needed a minute away from some of it. And also, I just couldn't get hooked in what was out there. Well, that all changed when I had to, for this interview, prepare by watching a new 6-part series by Discovery Plus called Relentless. Well, let me tell you, this was just what I needed to get back. And I will also say that my husband watched it with me, and he never watches true crime shows with me. That's just not his thing. So he was hooked. So this show kind of transcends the genre a bit, and it is so interesting, and I'm so lucky that I got to speak with the director, Christina Fontana, who, Relentless is the name of the series, and it's the perfect word to describe her. Take a listen.
You want to protect your kids from everything, and I can't protect her from anything.
Imagine your daughter or mom, there one day and gone the next. That's been the reality for one Hannibal family.
She darted out the back door, and that's the last time we all see her.
November 13th, 2009, 21-year-old Christina Whittaker disappeared. I started filming the family of Christina Whittaker in 2010. There are just some things about it that do not make sense.
It amazes me how many sightings we're having.
She was bleeding from her head.
There was guys raping her and beating her.
These little towns got more going on in them than you will find in any big city.
It's not just about the disappearance of Christina Whittaker, it's also about the environment in Hannibal.
She was in a lot of danger.
A lot of people said things like she got what she deserved.
Everything has a price, just remember that. Everything has a price.
This is organized crime.
It is organized.
It's organized crime.
You just snatch somebody up and take them out on the road where nobody knows them and they disappear.
This is a tourist town, Mark Twain tourist town. This is America's hometown.
There's so much corruption. You know, cops are dirty. Put your camera off for a second.
The reason why it happened, because it was a bomb in HPD.
What the?
I feel like I'm followed when I'm in town.
You are.
These guys around here are really good guys.
The only wall between us and solving this case is this eyewitness.
You got to be real careful who you trust, even people you think you can trust. You just don't know.
There are 4 episodes of the 6 out now that you can go and watch right in a row on Discovery Plus, and then you will have to wait for the final 2, episodes 5 and 6, the next 2 Mondays. You'll have to wait just like the rest of us, and it is grueling, let me tell you. I am so happy I got to talk to Christina about this bizarre and twisty case, and honestly, there's so much that comes up thematically through this series, and Christina and I get into all of it and hear about the update and status of the case. With that, please enjoy my conversation with Christina Fontana, and be sure to check out Relentless on Discovery Plus. Okay, Christina, welcome to Dialogue Podcast. I'm very excited to talk to you tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. I don't know where to start. Part of me wants to just be like, is she alive? Is she dead? Was she missing? Is she missing? But I don't think that's helpful for people. So why don't we start with the fact that you started out creating one project and found yourself making a very different film. So could we start with how you first got to know Christina Whittaker's family, what you were doing, and where things changed?
Yeah, that's exactly right. This started out as a very different project for me. In 2007, I was connecting with one of my friends who had a missing brother, and he was 18 at the time of his disappearance. And hearing her story about how difficult it was dealing with law enforcement because he was an adult and he has the right to go missing, she felt the need to carry the weight of her brother's investigation. And they ended up finding his remains years after his disappearance. So I started researching the subject and talking to this nonprofit called Project Jason, and they were helping families all over the country. And I became interested in what it was like for families of the missing, particularly when they had a loved one who was an adult. And I started finding a lot of them did have the same issues with law enforcement. Not all of them, but in a lot of areas, especially where there's not a lot of training, there's very small departments. A lot of these departments never even had seen a missing person case. Yeah. So they felt the need to carry their own investigations. And the documentary was supposed to be about their day-to-day. How do you go to work knowing that your loved one is out there? Because it's a very different trauma than losing someone in a car crash. That's something that happened and you mourn that and your brain can process it. But when you have a loved one that's missing, it's an ongoing trauma and it's really difficult for these people to move on. So originally it was supposed to be focusing on the families and hardly about the case at all. Right. In meeting all of these families around the country, I met Christina Whittaker's parents at a retreat for families of the missing in the summer of 2010. And Christina's mom, Cindy, really blew me away with her passion and tenacity to find Christina. And she actually had active leads. And that had not been something that I encountered before. And she felt that she had tracked Christina 200 miles away from where they lived in Hannibal, Missouri. And she had her down to a 20-block radius. And she was out there, her and her husband alone, and they were trying to do this. And I said, okay, let me see if I can help in some sort of way. So I started filming it in that way, with the full intention of being a fly on the wall. And as you can see in Relentless, it didn't end up that way. Since that moment, we had hundreds of leads and wild rumors and allegations against everyone in Christina's life, including her family and the police. So it really became a story of not understanding who to trust. I ended up getting sucked into the story and it just sort of became a wild ride from there.
Yeah, literally, there's a car chase, but we'll get there. So before we move on too much, I'm resonating so much with what you're saying about family members who have somebody missing, because it's ongoing and it's an uncertain kind of torture of not knowing. And the plight of the family to continue the investigation when law enforcement, for whatever reason, can't, and the colder a case gets, the less likely it is they're going to keep it at the top of a priority list. So my heart goes out to families in that situation. And I would imagine it was easy to want to come alongside a family and support them. And that your intentions were probably to do just that, and that there's viable leads potentially. And then it turns, so it appears quickly, but you've been on this now for 12 years. So when did you know things were not going as you thought they might?
Yeah, my intention was, again, to be a fly on the wall because I was filming with other families. I was following an active search in Minnesota. I was following Project Jason and the work that they were doing. So this was supposed to be one of my, 3 families that I was going to focus on. And I was flying out to the area where Christina's family felt that she was in Peoria, Illinois on the weekends. I was working all week. I was jumping on red eyes. Me and my camera guy, it was just us, sometimes just me. And it was 2.5 years into the investigation before I truly understood that things were not what they seem. Along the way, I kept wanting to go to their hometown in Hannibal to ask questions. And there was always a reason why I couldn't go. Every time I asked to go to Hannibal, an active lead, we're going to find Christina. We got this lead. Don't go there. Come here. And that went on for 2.5 years. And finally, I pushed my way into Hannibal and finally sat down with their private investigator, whom I hadn't met in 2.5 years, which was really odd.
Yeah.
And an allegation had come out that I was potentially being used, and it floored me. And that's when everything turned on its head for me.
That's so interesting. But let's set the scene a little bit. Christina Whittaker, according to her family, went missing in November of 2009. You met them in 2010 at this retreat you're talking about for families of missing persons. And it was around the 1-year anniversary that you officially began filming the search efforts, was sort of the plan. And this is all in Hannibal, Missouri, which in and of itself is an interesting part of the story. Maybe could you set the scene of Hannibal a little bit once you got there and got to feel and see it for yourself?
Yeah, Hannibal, Missouri is really beautiful. It's this picturesque town right on the Mississippi River. It has a lot of Mark Twain tourism. It hails as the boyhood home of Mark Twain. And the downtown area is very cute and quaint, the shops and restaurants, and they're very warm and welcoming residents there. Among those locals that will engage you in conversation, however, there is a general sense of mystery in the town and open secrets. There is common knowledge and a lot of allegations of major drug operations, organized crime, police corruption. I sit down in episode 4 with a former law enforcement official who worked in Hannibal as a police officer. And as part of his experience working as a cop, he says, these small river towns have more going on in them than you'll see in any big city. So I think he's right. I don't think it's necessarily unique to Hannibal, but it certainly adds to the mystery of the story.
It really, really does. And I should add that Christina had a little baby daughter, Alexandria, who her mom and stepdad are caring for. So what is Cindy's story? Because Cindy has a working theory as to what happened. So talk about that and then what you end up hearing from friends and neighbors and in your own investigation.
So the circumstances surrounding Christina's disappearance, she went out on a Friday night with a couple of her friends. Around 10:30, she became intoxicated and had an argument with a staff member at the bar, was asked to leave, and at that point, she was separated from her friends. Close to 1 a.m., she was seen at another bar. She came in visibly upset by herself. The bartender asked her if she wanted a ride home. She said no and darted out the back door, and that was the last anyone saw of Christina. The next morning, her cell phone was found on the ground about a block from the bar. Now, Cindy and Alex felt that the cops weren't really taking it seriously in the beginning, and they started canvassing the areas themselves. And they found word on the street was somebody took Christina into sex trafficking from Hannibal, Missouri, into Peoria, Illinois, almost 200 miles away, and they were keeping her there against her will. So that's where they focused their attention. And once they got there, there were a lot of sightings there. I was experiencing those reports of sightings as well as when I was there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's hard. We never got any verification. No one can provide proof of these sightings, but there are a lot of stories of her being in Peoria.
So you mentioned not talking to their private investigator for 2.5 years into your work. And when we see you meeting each other, he tells you things about Christina and the family that you didn't know. And not only that you didn't know, that the family didn't disclose, that they asked him not to share with you. So that's sort of the first sign for a viewer that something not good is going on. The family's manipulating something for some reason. It's not clear. But it reminds me of a theme that I think is really interesting. I would love to hear your thoughts on in terms of a victim in a story. With true crime documentaries and content being out there, there is a tendency to want to kind of sanctify a victim and speak only of their positive attributes. But humans are complex and messy, and sometimes knowing the full picture can be more helpful to, the facts of a case. So I'm just wondering, can you understand why Cindy didn't want to maybe reveal all the facts about her daughter? And then can you talk about your reaction to learning maybe some more of the reality and bigger picture of what was really going on?
Exactly right. One of the reasons I chose to do those diary cams in Relentless is because I really wanted the audiences to understand what I was feeling right in that moment. And it was a very confusing growing experience for me. And I comment in the later episodes, now that 10 years had gone by, how naive I was jumping into the situation without vetting, not being objective a lot of times, because I jumped into the situation wanting to be on their side. And the more I reveal in the episodes, the more it complicated our relationships. But I always understood and tried to communicate through those diary cams why that would be. I understand why you would want to lie about certain things that your child would do. And I hope one of the lessons that we take away from watching the entirety of Relentless is that when a family of a missing person feels the need to carry the weight of their investigation, it gets messy. Yeah. Families are not objective. And they shouldn't have to be. There's a natural tendency to want to protect your kid and protect yourself from judgment. There's a natural fear that if people judge you, they aren't going to want to help. And I always understood that. And I think what I had to grow into realizing is that you have to put everything on the table, because if you don't put all the information out there, you are trying to solve a puzzle without all of the pieces. Yeah. And when you have people trying to help, investigators or nonprofits or nosy filmmakers, and they find things out that you're hiding, that's when things get complicated. And I always communicated that with the family, that was part of our journey, that it was very confusing because this town particularly has a lot of rumors going around it. There are a lot of rumors and allegations in this case. But then when you find out the people that you are trusting are manipulating and hiding things from you, and that wasn't the only time that somebody showed me a text message that said, don't share this information with Christina Fontana, that it made it very difficult. And that was part of our journey, that, you have to be skeptical, but you have to be kind, because you need to understand that there isn't a book for this. Everyone is trying their best. And these families are going through a lot, so you can't really blame them.
Right. Oh, it's a living hell when you assume it's really happening as you think it's happening. And, they're not wrong. I think, unfortunately, we're still not at a place where we can accept and view a victim in the same way when it's a middle-class, affluent, straight-A student who was, on her way to doing things we all, would deem more important. The attention is different. And that's a sad reality. And so they're probably savvy to that and didn't want to give law enforcement any less reason to motivate them to look and not just keep this as like a throwaway case. However, her possible use of drugs really makes the story going into sex work a little more logical, I suppose, because randomly being picked up for that is pretty rare. So what other allegations and rumors start coming out among her friends and people you meet of other possible scenarios of what's happening, and then maybe what her mom isn't telling you on top of some past behaviors about Christina's whereabouts?
Yeah, without revealing too much, there are many different allegations going on in Christina's case that have to do with the family and also the police that get revealed throughout the episodes. In episode 3, you really get inside Christina's head and some of the things that she was experiencing before she went missing. And even further than that, there are some things that we reveal in episode 5 and 6 that are pretty damning, but they're germane to the case. There was motivation for Christina to leave and hide. There was motivation for people to kill Christina. There are a couple, and there were a lot of theories in this case. I personally believe that there are 2 to 3 that stand taller than the rest. And that's where I end up focusing on towards the end of Relentless, where we're getting towards the back half of the episodes. Okay. Once I start making sense of everything, I think in episode 1, I had the story that I was brought into and meeting all of these characters. And then, at the end of 1 and 2, the walls come down and I don't know which way is up and down. And once I get into Hannibal in episode 3, I really start understanding, okay, that I need to look at all of these other angles. Episodes 4 through 6 are a complete thrill ride of all of these leads that we end up exploring that are going to answer a lot of questions for the people who may have been watching episodes 1 through 3.
I am so excited to share with you that She's Birdie is back. She's Birdie is a modern personal safety alarm, and what better season to fit into than this one? We have been talking about personal safety, stories of surviving, and I don't know about you, but anything I can do to feel safer at this point, I'm going to try. So I have a birdie alarm. I actually have several. My family members have them. I give them as gifts. In fact, my daughter graduates from high school on Friday, and all of her friends going to college, boys included, are getting a She's Birdie. If you're feeling uncertain, unsafe, or if you're threatened, you can activate Birdie's loud alarm. It's a 130 decibel siren and a flashing strobe light which creates a diversion. It's also very cute. It comes in 5 colors, each with a solid brass keychain that you can put on your bag, your keys, your dog leash. I know a lot of women like to hike and run with them. My favorite part about Birdie is that it doesn't go off if you don't want it to. It's rolling around my bag. It's being tossed under the counter with my keys. It doesn't go off. And yet, I've practiced. When I want it to, it's really easy to use. I'm actually an ambassador for She's Birdie, and it's because I stand behind their social mission. Birdie is committed to creating a world where women's safety is a given. They believe every person has the right to feel safe and are focusing on women as a place to start. Their impassioned community is engaging conversations between men and women, educating and giving. For every alarm purchased, Birdie gives 5% of profits to a partnering organization that passionately support women's safety, shelter, and health. So if you want to try She's Birdie, go to shesbirdie.com, and when you're ready to purchase, use the code DIEHARD, DIEHARD, for 10% off your Birdie. That's DIEHARD, and you can shop at shesbirdie.com. The link will be in the show notes. Okay, so this will come out next week, so 4 might be out at the time of this release. I mean, I'm obviously just like dying to know what happens. How conclusive of an ending do we get without telling us the ending? I've resisted Googling. Is this an ongoing investigation, or is there a resolve?
This is an ongoing investigation. I will say in episode 6, we have some very big revelations. Okay. And that is going to shed a lot of light of motivations to what may have happened to Christina, people who may have been motivated to hide information or motivated to harm her. The very last scene in episode 6 is a lead that I had been trying to clear, and I was stopped. And I think that is the first thing that needs to be done, is really to vet that lead. So yeah, we find out a lot, but Christina's case is an open case.
Okay.
It is still an active case.
Okay. I was getting nervous for you at various parts. I'm curious, was there a time you can remember where you were like viscerally afraid?
There were a couple of houses I had entered in, areas, particularly in Peoria, where I was staking out, which were not safe areas to be in. But I was thinking about earlier today, this moment where I am approached by somebody in the woods in Hannibal that you will see in episode 4. And our camera stands back while I go to try to diffuse the situation a little bit. And the entire time I'm talking to this man, he has his hand in his overalls, and it's clear that he's holding onto a gun. And I was just really trying to just kind of, bumble my way out of that situation. I'm just like, hi, I don't know what I'm doing back here. I must be lost. And
I was already scared when you said woods. I mean, like, forget the gun. I'm already like, get out of the woods.
Yeah, it was a surreal experience. There are moments where I feel that I'm being followed in town, and some things that we find out, that you will see in episode 4, that there's some dangerous elements that I'm dealing with, particularly in Hannibal, that every time I come into town, and I won't say that this is for a tourist, it's only because of what I'm dealing with, that not everyone's going to feel this way driving down the streets of Hannibal. But for me, I felt very on guard and on edge at all times.
Sure. I can imagine. I mean, I don't think it probably took long for news to spread about, what you were doing there, and you were poking and things were coming up. So that makes sense. How did you maintain a relationship with Cindy? I'm forgetting her husband's name. Alex, thank you. When you started to suspect they're playing you a little bit, how did you continue the work, continue being professional and committing to this project you've done? Did you ever just say, like, forget it? Maybe I don't need to do this.
Yeah, there were a couple key moments. I believe I have one of these strong feelings in episode 5 where people are asking me, why are you still doing this? And I don't know why I'm still doing this, but I kept going back to the idea that it was about justice for Christina. When I joined the search for Christina, it wasn't because they had to be good people. There were no strings attached. I wasn't doing it under the condition that they would never lie to me, or I didn't find out that they had been arrested or there was drugs in the family. It didn't come with any of those conditions. It was because Christina was missing. And I was holding on to that. And that's what got me through. And as far as finding out things about the family, it was interesting because, again, there are a lot of rumors and doubt that families of the missing experience that I knew about going into this. So when I started experiencing it firsthand, I didn't want to believe it. And there's still a lot of things I don't want to believe that I've been told. But I also felt that, let me try to get to the bottom of this without giving them another thing to worry about. Yeah. That if people are saying these things about them, like, let me just try to see if it's true or not before I start, barking at them that, I heard this, I heard that. And I did have those honest conversations with them on camera and off camera. Look, I'm hearing this. I wanted to tell you. And a lot of the things they already heard. They said, we've heard that before. It's this town, it's Hannibal. So it's just part of the story of what families of the missing go through.
Oh, it's so heartbreaking. Are you in active communication with the family at this point? When did you stop filming?
Our last scene was shot May 21st, I think it was, this year. And by the way, my phone has been ringing off the hook since the show dropped on the 28th. I've been getting calls nonstop from people in Hannibal that believe that they have information on the case. Wow. Or believe that they have stories of corruption that they want to share. So, and that was my hope for, putting this out there, is that people with direct knowledge of the case will see the people who are coming out in the episodes and being brave enough to speak, to inspire them to also be brave. Look, you're not alone. There are a lot of people that are coming out now. It's time, let's get justice for this girl. So yes, we're still in communication. Of course, there's a lot of raw emotion, just about the case in general.
Of course.
So everyone's processing things in their own way, of course. Yeah. But yeah, the focus has always remained not stopping until we have justice for Christina.
Well, it's great that it's inciting some momentum and new information possibly. Is your role right now kind of capturing that and tossing it to law enforcement? Or are you going to continue to go down there and document anything? What do you see? How do you see it maybe unfolding?
Yeah, for right now, I'm getting these phone calls. I keep asking the folks who are calling me, is there any proof to back some of these stories up? Some of the things that they're giving me, we already have and have reported to law enforcement. Okay. So at this point, my wish is one of those, pieces of evidence that comes in that really brings everything home. So yes, when we get substantial things, we always hand it off to law enforcement. But because they see me out there and there's a way to find me, through the show, through Facebook, because it's friends of friends, that's why people feel that they can reach out to me. Yeah. Some people actually reached out to the police department and they're not getting calls back. So that's why they reached out to me, that I tried to tell HPD and they're not calling me back, but I want to tell somebody what I know. And I said, okay, I'm here to listen.
And is the private investigator, the family's investigator, is he still part of the story and connected to the case?
No, he's not.
Okay. And I have to ask how Alexandria is. I can't remember which episode it is, but in some ways, it's incredibly healthy. She was very young when Christina left. And so they kept her memory alive with photos. And some of her first sentences seemed to be about her mom, which I thought was really beautiful and important for her to have some connection to her mom. But as the episode and time progressed, you see she's deeply impacted by her mother's absence. And the family, I don't know if perpetuate's the wrong word, but it's a big topic of conversation. And it does come up in the film. I was wondering about your take on it, and also how old is she right now and how is she doing?
She's 12 years old. Wow. She's amazing.
Wow.
She's a very, very strong girl. She talks about having a career in law enforcement. Yeah, it's tough, because when you think about families of the missing who feel the need to carry the weight of their investigations, right? How do you turn that off? And wanting to connect Christina to her daughter is such a natural, beautiful thing to do. But it's hard to separate the wanting her to know the truth and protecting her. And, and again, it gets very complicated and messy. So I do believe that they're focusing on making sure that she's okay and, taking little vacations and nurturing her right now. And I do think that she's such a strong girl. So I believe that she will go on to do amazing things in the future because of having to deal with some very real things.
So let's shift a little bit and talk more thematically. When you realized you had a true crime story, it must have been a different way to edit and package and think through the storytelling part of this. Like, where does that come in? Because you're the director, and I know your background, it looks like, is in like more of the technical editing. So did you do all that for this film too? And how did you think about shaping it?
Yeah, I had 400 hours of footage to deal with over this, 11 years being a part of this investigation. So it was a lot. So I had very, very talented editors and producers, story producers helping me shape it. I think one of the smartest decisions I made was to bring on a showrunner, George Mull. He is amazing. He comes from a journalism background. And I really wanted to make sure that I had a team that would help me because I'm so close to this footage, I'm in it. So I remember sitting down with everybody when we started post-production and I said, okay, guys, I whittled the list down of people of interest down to 76 people.
Holy moly. Oh my God.
That's how many people that I was like, well, I mean, I had well over 100. That's how much was thrown at me in these 10 years. So to me, it was very, very helpful to have these creative people streamline, say, okay, we cannot throw 70 names at people. No one's going to retain this. Let's, make sure that we roll out the story the way it happened. I mean, we had, because it was an active investigation, we were going along the years that helped. Of course, there were some things that we needed to introduce in the beginning, like who Christina was. And since I, in the beginning of my story, was going to Peoria so often just on these stakeouts and trying to find the leads. And I hadn't gone to Hannibal yet. Of course, we have to introduce people to what the case is so they understand what they're following when they're with in Peoria. So that's how it got shaped that way. And I'm so thankful for the team that I had. And of course, the partners at Blumhouse and Discovery Plus helping me really communicate to the audience and something that people can digest was just a godsend.
I bet. And the choice for you to go on camera and start incorporating your experience into the film, how early did that happen? Did you bounce that off of other people? Or was that like, this has got to happen because it's essential to how this is unfolding?
Yeah, so it was definitely not my intention to be in the documentary at all. I was filming with these other families. I wasn't on camera at all. And 2.5 years into the investigation of Christina Whittaker, that text message had come in that you see at the end of episode 1 that was so bizarre to me and I had been having these bizarre experiences of every time I would go to Peoria, the leads that we were supposed to be chasing just kind of disappeared. There was no sense of urgency. It was very odd. And it would always happen when I was trying to go to Hannibal. So I was already feeling a little off. And I remember my director of photography, he wasn't even with me at the time. He was meeting me in Hannibal because at that point I was pushing my way into town. I said, I have to go and speak to people in Christina's life, And I was telling him about the experience that I had with this very strange text message that came in. And he was like, look, you should jump on camera tonight and just document this in like a diary cam, what is happening here. Because, and at the time it was, so we don't forget. I said, okay, because I was telling him over the phone, he's like, that sounds really bizarre. So that's why I did it. It was messy, very out of focus. It was just this raw confusion I was having.
Yes. Well, that's so interesting because, it was like a helpful tool for your own workflow process that ends up being, I personally loved the choice. I loved having you in there to kind of bridge the gap between us and the story that you were also kind of on this ride. I loved it.
Yeah, and eventually once that revelation from their investigator that I, somehow am being used in some sort of way and the camera kind of turns. And at that point, I really wanted to keep those diary cams going because I really wanted people to feel in the moment what I was feeling and how confusing it was. My processing all of these things coming at me was something that I really wanted people to, experience along with me.
Okay. So who would be the other key players that would be worth mentioning at the top?
Since your audience will have seen episode 4 at this point, the case takes a turn and a name of Glenn Ledbetter comes up, and it opens up into this world of organized crime and these group that everyone in town referred to as the Asphalters. And it is very, very interesting, this world. And these people are very dangerous. They run from scams to drug operations. There's a lot of corruption involved with these people. So in episode 4, it's like, what?
Yeah, I think we see a preview or a trailer for that at the end of 3. And I'm like, how? So is that a known entity? Not to you probably at that moment, but is that is that local to Hannibal, Asphalters? Is that a thing? I don't know what it means.
That's everybody calls them the Asphalters because I think one of the bigger schemes that they do are paving scams.
Gotcha.
So these group of folks, some of them are descendants of Chill. They have settled in Hannibal, and even though part of the culture comes from Romani backgrounds, some of them have turned to a life of crime.
Okay.
And that's what I learned from these FBI investigators, because once we get into this world, I am way in over my head here. And I tapped some FBI agents that actually worked operations against this organized crime entity and dealt with it. And that's where you start to get into the world of drug operations and the police corruption allegations that come from law enforcement officials and local residents alike.
Wow. And how big is their presence in Hannibal, the Asphalters?
Pretty big. Yeah, I don't have an exact number of how many residents there are, but in a town of 17,000 people, everyone knows who you're talking about when you say the Asphalters.
Okay. I have to ask, is there any fear of deterring? I was texting with friends before I got on and telling them that they have to watch this and that I'm about to talk to the director. And one of them is on the board of that nonprofit I mentioned. And she's like, please don't tell me the girl wasn't missing. Like, she's so afraid of anything that thwarts efforts for missing persons searches. So how do you think about that? And I'm not suggesting this does or that the story shouldn't be told. The story is the story. You can't change the facts. But I'm just wondering how you think about that.
That she might not be missing?
If she isn't, I don't know. Like, if she left intentionally, some of her friends suggested she maybe wanted to be gone. But I guess even just the messiness of it, of exposing a family who might be acting in a less than completely honest way, taking advantage of people and things that come with a missing person investigation, exposing that makes the whole, because people generalize and make connections. How do you think about that?
Yeah, that was such a struggle for me. And I say it even in episode 2, right after I find out these allegations from Bill, it was such a gut punch to me because the whole reason I started the project was to show the plight of families of the missing. Exactly. And I still very close to some very, very amazing families in this community, this small, tight-knit community that protect each other. And I was welcomed in as an ally, and I wanted to do something to help. And I still do. And I keep up with these nonprofits and these families. And I'd like to go on to tell more of their stories. And when that happened, I was like, no. And that was a real big struggle for me, that I didn't want to believe that things weren't so black and white. And the truth is, sometimes they are not so black and white. And this was a story that was not expected. And yes, there are theories that Christina is hiding, that she had ran away. She's still missing to her daughter. She's still missing to many people in her life. And there are a lot of people looking for her. Yeah. So she deserves to be found. And if there's a reason that she's hiding, she still deserves to be heard. And she deserved some justice for some of the things that had happened to her. I think we talked about it earlier, but I'll say again that I think in all of these stories, I think it's important to be skeptical, but I think it's also important to be kind. And that was something that I really wanted to make sure that it came through, that it was very important to be honest and to put everything on the table. And we discussed why. And I do believe putting everything on the table will push this case forward to getting justice for Christina. So just to, really drive that point home, I think with all of these stories, especially when you're dealing in the true crime realm, that you have to ask the questions and you have to report what happened, but you really need to be kind about it in the best way possible.
That is something I don't think can be said enough. I think there's enough people digging and being skeptical and being insensitive, even if their motives are good, to get justice or the truth. But I think, remembering kindness and that you're dealing with humans, good ones, bad ones, shady ones, people who are both on different days, that's so important. What would you do differently now approaching a story? And then to follow that, can you even start thinking about another story you want to tell or a case you want to investigate? Or is this too close and active still?
Yeah, I think I've definitely learned a lot from being around the investigators that I've brought on all of these years. So I would do vetting before I jumped in, and it wouldn't stop me from helping a family again, but I would want all of the information first, just so I wouldn't be subject to anyone manipulating information out of fear of judgment.
Yeah.
So I'll say that. And yes, I keep up with a lot of these families who are being relentless in their own cases. And it's not even just missing people. It might be families trying to seek justice for their murdered loved one, or, just in other areas that I would love to tell those stories. And finding a home at Discovery Plus is amazing because they too are very passionate about justice and getting these stories out there. I would definitely love to continue telling the stories of other people in their own investigations.
Oh, good. I'm excited for that. And it's so needed. Is there this was like a big news week in courts and trial and true crime news, if you will. Is there any case like in real time that you're following, not professionally to cover, but just personally that's kind of piquing your interest? Like Bill Cosby his conviction was overturned. Allison Mack from Nexium Cult was sentenced yesterday.
It's been a very wild week for me with everything. And I have to say, I'll peek down at the news and say, oh boy, no, or oh boy, what? But I have to say, I usually try to run and find a happy place. And if I have a moment of downtimes, it's Schitt's Creek for me or something. Comedy. Balance out the dark stuff that I'm dealing with.
That's so smart. Schitt's Creek is a perfect antidote to everything. Well, that's a perfect setup for my closing question to my guests is what gets you up in the morning? And I should tell you, my first season, I asked everybody what keeps them up at night. And those answers were getting so dark. So what gets you up in the morning?
Aside from my cat maybe walking on my face early in the morning.
They do that.
I'm a very motivated, stubborn, passionate person about the things that I get involved in. I think the thing that drives me, I'd say, is being able to mix my love of film, that medium of something that I love to do with service work. So I think that was what motivated me to start this documentary in the first place. Doing any type of service work gets me up in the morning, that type of volunteer stuff. And when I started doing the documentary and I was joining all these search and rescue crews and helping them, even if I was just filming or, and then just kind of got caught up in the effort, that made me feel alive. Yeah. And that's something that I would love to continue doing. So I think that's what would get me up in the morning.
I love it. Well, I can't wait to see what story you tell next. And I really can't recommend Relentless more. My husband watched it with me. He won't watch any true crime with me. It's not his thing, but he was hooked. So ringing endorsement from DIE-ALOGUE. And Christina, thank you so much for being on and killing the small talk.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. DIE-ALOGUE is a Yellowtape media production edited by Jason Usry and produced and hosted by me, Rebecca Sebastian. Please be sure to subscribe to DIE-ALOGUE, a true crime conversation, wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on social media. We are at DIE-ALOGUE Pod across all platforms. You can also drop me a note or a guest suggestion or sign up for my newsletter at RebeccaSebastian.com. Be sure to join me every Wednesday for a new episode and another killer conversation.